Thanks everyone for joining us today. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Al Shalloway. Al is another absolute prolific writer between books and blogs and articles and LinkedIn postings and just so many things. Al, my tagline for you is, did somebody ask about lean? Because so much of an impact that you've had in a lot of areas, but lean is definitely one of them. That I would say is the biggest. And our topic for today is how to move from Scrum or SAFe to disciplined Agile. And with that, Al, I will turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Okay, here, let me share my screen. Well, it's funny, and thanks for the introduction. You know, I'm actually beginning to think I'm more now about flow than lean, but lean is a very solid base, and the reason for that is partly Don Reinertson's work. A lot of people are familiar with his book, Principles of Product Development Flow, second generation lean product development. And if you notice, flow is in the main title and lean is in the subtitle, and there's a reason for that. Lean is a thought process and it's quite good. There's nothing I've found where it's not brilliant. But what we're trying to achieve is actually flow, and I'll be talking about that. So I'm kind of into both of them. Now, this is this picture of me here. I'm not going to say much about myself. I've been around the block a long time. I've been in Agile 21 years. I started out technical work as a developer in 1970 when I started college and got into business applications around 1980, formed net objectives in 99. I'm now Director of Thought Leadership for Agile at Scale programs at the PMI, which I am really delighted and excited. Our CEO, Sunil, is a very strong visionary. I think we're going to really surprise a lot of people about what the PMI can do. We're not attached to the past. We're actually jumping into what I think is the next generation of where Agile's going. And the timing for this is pretty good. Now, I'm not going to have this be a seminar where I show a lot of slides, but I'm going to talk mostly. But I've been really thinking about this, and there's this issue where a lot of preset approaches lead to a lack of fit for purpose. In other words, if it's preset, then it may or may not fit you. And some don't even have a theory explaining why and how to improve the delivery value. I'm talking about Scrum here mostly. Others allude to it. But it's very important to understand why things work. And I don't mean like if you've got a self-contained, like Scrum has a lot of values and principles that are themselves self-contained, and you can explain why Scrum would work if you do those. I'm talking about like gravity, like what are the natural laws that are out there? And I love this, admittedly, paraphrase of Edwards Deming. Theory without practice is useless. Practice without theory is expensive. I think we thrash a lot because we tend to do this. We don't quite understand why it's useful. And the creating a way to make choices does not need to create complexity. A lot of people talk about this, like, well, if it's simple, so we make it easy to use. And simple doesn't necessarily mean easy to use. And not complete, because nothing ever is complete, but a more complete, a fuller system that knows how to expose itself in different ways. Boy, that sounded weird, didn't it? Knows how to provide information at the right time and in the right way. That sounds better. Is possible, and in fact is what disciplined Agile is. We want to remember our goal is to shorten time from request to realization of value, and we should intend to the entire value stream. Okay, so what I want to look at is, and I am going to kind of talk about these, not so much. I do have a slide here that I'll leave for reference, but it's important to understand Scrum and frameworks in general. That's really kind of what I want to talk about. So Scrum, if you're at all familiar with it, is really based on cross-functional teams and time boxing. This is really a good thing. Time boxing means we're going to say, how much work can we get done in the next 2 weeks? Or, well, it used to be a month, now it's 2 weeks. Some people do it a week. The idea is I need to go small, and that causes that going kind of small. But the cross-functional teams, meaning I have all the people and skills I need, it results in fewer handoffs. At least inside the team, there might be handoffs, but outside the team, they're not. Handoffs inside a team are not so bad because they're right there, hopefully cross hopefully co-located. When Scrum started out, it was used by co-located teams all in one place that were cross-functional, building products. Scrum was designed to build new products. The name of the article that inspired it was the new product development game. It gives you a clue what it was designed for. So fewer handoffs and delays. This is all good, working on smaller items. You can't have big ones because you got a 2-week window. So it encourages you to get down to 1 to 3 days. You get finished work product, even if you can't deliver it. It avoids workload beyond capacity. Not a coincidence that these are the main targets of a flow process. See, and this is what's really interesting, what you want to start thinking about when you want to see how can disciplined Agile improve Scrum. I assert that attending to flow directly, what these are all giving us indirectly, is more useful than attending to the practices themselves. This is the essence of it, is how do we start focusing on what we're trying to accomplish directly instead of indirectly trying to accomplish it. So in some ways, you don't even have to change Scrum. Just use Scrum, being aware of this, knowing that what you're going to do is, well, I'm trying to get fewer handoffs, fewer handbacks. I want to eliminate delays in my workflow. I want to work on smaller items. I want to frequently have finished product I can demonstrate. I want to avoid workload beyond capacity. See, if you think about that, it gives a whole different set of opportunities. Because now if you have troubles doing one of these things, you can ask yourself, well, okay, the practice might not be so great, but the intention of the practice is good. By the way, this is not a new concept. A lot of things are good intentions, but bad implementations. Waterfall has good intentions, bad implementation. Waterfall is about what am I going to get? When am I going to get it? How much is it going to cost me? All those are good intentions. How do I lower my risks? Of course, the implementation is atrocious, but intentions are one thing. What you actually achieve is another thing. So we like the intentions, but what if it's not working? What if we want to change the process? This is kind of really what's important. And this is really the essence of how Discipline Agile can help here. Because what Discipline Agile is based on, it's based on basically what we call the science of flow and lean. And actually, I'll throw theory of constraints in because I've been influenced a lot by Steve Tendon's work, Tame Flow Kanban. And by the way, it's kind of a hard book to get through, but it's really brilliant. He's got some gems in there that are just like, whoa, Steve, this is brilliant stuff. And see, this is what's nice. I can talk about other people doing good stuff like this because I'm not trying to promote Disciplined Agile as much as I'm trying to promote what works. Now, I'm biased. I think Disciplined Agile works great, but it can actually be used on other things, such as in like Scrum. One of the things we can do is if you are doing Scrum, then shift your mind. Think about Scrum as an example of how you could work. Okay, it's got roles and events and artifacts and rules. And in the Scrum guide, they're immutable. But wait a minute, just erase that immutable. Immutable and Agile don't go together. I mean, it's funny how people don't tend to point that out a lot. Immutable is the exact opposite of Agile. You want to be Agile in your process as well, but you want to make sure it's doing what you need it to do. So just abandoning Scrum practices is a bad thing. That leads to what they call Scrum butt. I think there's such a thing as good Scrum, but we do Scrum, but we do this. That could be a good thing you're doing instead. But Scrum, but where, well, we don't do iterations anymore because we couldn't get things finished. Well, that's bad. What you just did is you eliminated a practice that was trying to get you to an intention. When that's okay, but you can't eliminate the practice. You got to do another practice that gets you to that intention. So let's say you can't get things to an end. Okay, well, you got to ask yourself, you can't get things completed, say, at the end of a sprint. Well, you should be getting things completed at the end of a sprint if, in fact, you need that for the discipline. It could be, however, that you could go to, well, we're going to go real small stories and we're going to focus on completing stories as they come up and not having many stories at any one time. So you can say, well, we don't really do Scrum anymore. We do Scrum, but we don't have iterations. We do a flow model where we focus on getting stories small and done quickly. And then you just get one done, one done, one done, one done. And then you meet all these requirements. You got small work items, you got finished work product frequently. You don't overload yourself because you're working on just a couple small things, and there are fewer handoffs because you just get this small thing done. See, that kind of Scrum bud is good, but just abandoning the practice without substituting an intention is not good. So when you have problems with Scrum, what you want to look at is what's the intention? Is there another way to do this? And go that way. Now, this is where Discipline Agile comes in. It actually has all these options. This is what we mean by choose your way of working. So you can extend Scrum. You can extend Scrum by Discipline Agile you could even choose a starting point that would look just like Scrum if you want, if you think that's a good idea. Or take what you have, think of Scrum as you're doing it as an example, see how to substitute practices as they work, and choose your own way of working so you have better fit for purpose. The other advantage of this, by the way, is then as you learn how to do this to start or to improve, you're learning how to continuously improve as well. Okay, I have about 15 minutes for each topic. This is the first one. I don't see anything in the chat. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. So Joshua can handle it, but then he'll pass it on to me. So please do ask questions. I'm going to put up one other slide here. I am not going to go over this slide. This is more of a reference. Oops. I wanted to have this in there so people can come back. This was kind of a little bit of a summary as to what I said. So I'll just let you read this for a minute, and I'll let you be thinking of questions. Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing with SAFe, I'll kind of start segueing as this is up there. I think with this segue to SAFe, I'll say that, yeah, I was a contributor before SAFe was actually even announced. When we knew it was coming because Dean had been writing the book. I had breakfast with him out near his home. I guess this was around 2011 or something. Because at that time, Dean and ourselves, my company, Net Objectives, that last year was acquired by the PMI, at the time, we had done actually, I think, more than half of the large-scale adoptions in Agile that had been successful. We had segued into large-scale Agile around 2005, and had quite a pretty decent approach back then. We didn't have a name for it. It was just kind of lean. Agile is all we called it. Guy Beaver, I, and Jim Trott wrote a book called Lean Agile Software Development, Achieving Enterprise Agility. Actually around that time, or a couple of years before, actually around 2009, I think. But SAFe was kind of better defined. Dean was obviously a great marketer even back then. And so I contributed by basically by adding technical stuff. I brought in a variety of other things, particularly Kanban, and was a gold partner for a little while, but the limits of frameworks weren't quite clear to me back then, and SAFe hasn't really, they keep adding, but there's a kind of a problem in some of the design with the different levels. So I'm going to get into that in just a second. And the question is, yeah, bad implementation, yeah, it's a bad life cycle decision. That's exactly what I meant by that. Thanks, Dan. But my point was, we always diss waterfall, like, oh, it's bad, it's evil, it's all wrong. The thing to remember is that, well, it is, it's a bad implementation, it's a bad life cycle. But if you step back and ask, why are people doing this? That's not bad. I just want to make that distinction between intention and implementation. Those are two different things. And something might implement bad, but have a good intention. Something might have a good intention and implement bad. Okay. So anyway, to sum this section up, I'm going to go over to the SAFe part. Is Scrum can be a good starting point. It's not always the right starting point. If you have a cross-functional team, and if you have the value where time boxing is a good thing, because it isn't always. If you have stuff coming in that you can't plan for, then Scrum could be a good start. And then you could use Disciplined Agile as one of two ways to improve it. Either look at it as Scrum as example, these are things I can change, or just look at it as a baseline for making choice, choose your way of working with Disciplined Agile. And sometimes you'll find that you don't quite match the Scrum guide starting point of Scrum, and then maybe substitute some things in. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that question about team flow. You know, Joshua, you ought to consider getting Steve on here and doing a talk. The guy's brilliant. His stuff's brilliant.
Yeah, and maybe we can ask you to come back, and you and Steve can.
That would be fun. That would be fun. One of
Yes.
the fun things I like about Steve is, I mean, well, a lot of things I mean, not personally. I like Steve personally. I didn't mean that. But is both of us just come from what works. Um, it's kind of funny. I'm doing some work internally in the PMI, starting to work with some of the development groups. And what I noticed after I started having some of these conversations and talked to our leadership team and things like that, I said, Al, it's kind of cool. You're not mentioning disciplined agile. You're not saying we should do this because we got to walk our talk. All true things. I'm saying this because this is what works. See, that's the thing. Tame flow is just what Steve has figured out what works based on theory of constraints, mostly his work. My stuff's based mostly on flow. We kind of meet in the middle. We haven't yet found anything that's inconsistent, but we're not trying to create well, here's my set of rules. Here's my laws I tend to. It's rather what works. And he's got a different experience than me and the rest of the DA team. So his approach of building and putting the pieces together is different, but the underlying fundamentals are the same. Okay, so let's get into SAFe here. And I'm going to suggest SAFe is kind of an interesting beast in several ways. So here, this picture right here, and this is the pre-prettied up picture. This is supposed to look like a whiteboard, actually. Like you might notice here, the markers down here. Because when I start a implementation, a transition, what I do is I actually get all the execs, all the directors, the team leads, I've had as many as 40, 50 people in a big room. And I just walk through them what I call the idealized value stream. You got portfolio management, product management, dev intake, dev deploy and support. You'd be surprised how the idealized workflow for most every organization is very similar at the core. There are differences, like if you've got FDA regulation or if you've got hardware involved or things like that. But this flow, now it looks linear and I don't mean it to be that way. Feedback loops aren't shown, but they're of course throughout here. You've got here you've got high level stuff, and down here you're in the weeds working on stuff. So it's just it's an idea of there's this general flow of ideas from here over until it's done. But what's interesting is look to see where do your problems exist. Now, most people think their problems are here because they see the dev teams frenetic and jammed up and things like that. But I would suggest an analogy is like I've got a gasoline pump here that's leaking gasoline that's flowing downhill, and somebody has started it on fire here. And for some reason, this fire doesn't come back here. So we see all this burning and all this flames, and we're blaming the development team. But they're really at the effect of people changing requirements and things just being pushed on them, and they get started to work, and then all of a sudden they get a new set of requirements. Oh yeah, we forgot about that. That's more important. Then of course, I know you committed to this amount of work in 3 months. Now you need this amount of work plus this new work. These guys are the arsonists and these guys are the fires, but it doesn't mean they're the arsonists. So in a lot of organizations where you say, let's start with a Scrum team, let's expand the Scrum teams and work our way up, which by the way, maybe is how SAFe does it with essential SAFe. I'm suggesting this isn't necessarily the right thing to do. Besides which, if you're using SAFe, if you are going to do essential SAFe, sometimes the best way to get it going is simply say, hey, look, getting teams working in a 2-week sprint, getting people working where they integrate across teams. If you believe in systems thinking, which I do, if you believe that systems kind of create a lot of the problems that we have, good systems are helpful, bad systems beat good people kind of thing. I have found it's a lot easier to create the notion that we're going to work in a 2-week cadence with everybody. We're going to do a planning event, and you just kill the resistance to the 2-week cadence. It says, look, we got to be in sync because otherwise we're not going to be able to integrate. The reason you use things like 2-week sprints and time box and work together becomes a lot clearer at the local level when you take the big picture. So I'm suggesting 2 things. One is you don't even necessarily need to start training the teams. I think it's more important to train how they're going to work together, then make sure they start realizing this is the context you have to work in of these 2-week sprints. I mean, if you can train them and they're already good at Agile, that's great. I'm not saying you don't need it, but you actually need more of the bigger picture context. But here's the real point. Look at all this stuff up here. what are we working on? Why are we working on it? How does our portfolio? This is what drives the team here. And if you start with Essential Safe, you often leave off the real important stuff. In fact, one of the things that's not obvious, because Safe in a lot of ways has, and I admit I got a lot of energy on this. I'm trying to get to be more forgiving, but Safe kind of redefined what the value stream means. The value stream, this is a lean definition that's been around for at least 70 years, is the flow of work. So we have our customer, and this, watch the arrow. This is the value stream. We go up here and we go through all this to figure out what needs to happen. And then we come down here and we flow through this, and then we flow through that. We get something done and it comes back. You can't even see the value stream here. And see, they talk about value streams as the group of people that are working. Now, yes, you should have people somewhat committed, stable team, somewhat committed to products, the whole project to product, totally love it. But imagine this, if I've got two products, two different value streams, going through the same group of people, and you think, oh, that's my value stream, this group of people is because they're the ones doing the work. Then how do you disentangle them? You need to look at the workflow. This is one of the big shifts in Lean, is we don't look at the people, we look at the workflow. It's not because we don't think the people are important. It's because we actually acknowledge they're important. We know we can trust them. We need to look at the workflow so they can see how to work together. And this is really a very critical thing. So if we go back to this picture here where we have the whole thing, we want to recognize that Essential Safe is starting at the tail end, and maybe not all we should be starting at. There are a lot of essential concepts needed that are left out. It doesn't really talk about the whole value stream. It's got it from this point here, but if this is the wrong stuff, that can be problematic. Now, there's another concept. These are actually my two big bugs in my mind, that it doesn't attend to the value stream, and it doesn't also have what we call minimum business increments. It's kind of bastardized what the minimum viable product is. Now, the MVP has an interesting history, which was, it was not created by Eric Ries. The term MVP, actually, I think it was Frank Brooks or Frank Robinson, I think, or somebody like that. Frank Robinson, I'm pretty sure. Not the baseball player. That's why I think it was Frank Robinson, because I always remember, oh, it's not the baseball player. But he came up with the idea of a minimum viable product as how do you find a small increment and get it out the door. And Eric Ries usurped that name for when I have a new product, a new thing I'm going to build, something I don't even know is a product. I want to see if it is. I want to discover it. So it's really useful concept. But notice when you have something like this, you're typically also have an isolated team that's working on it, or a team core by itself. It's a small thing. That's a different kind of investment, saying I'm going to build something to discover if I've got a product, I'm going to evolve it and do very small, versus most of the work done at scale is when you have an existing product and you're enhancing it. The investment here is I'm investing for a return, and maybe more important, I need a lot of people across the organization to build it. So the MBI is what we use here in the middle, and MVPs when you have innovative stuff, things like that. And the MBIs contain not only what is the intention from an investment point of view to improve my functionality, but also what teams do I need, not just here, but also down in ops and support and marketing. So it's a really good handoff thing, and it also, we need more concepts though. So the idea of what we call a focused solution team, maybe I've got 2 or 3 teams I can pull out of a train, and they could work on this product and build it completely. So how do we subdivide trains is important. And what SAFE tends to do, which is a very good step, first step for many companies, is you get these programs, the Agile, the release trains, you get them working together, managing their dependencies, actually more like accommodating their dependencies. They have dependencies, you identify them in the program increment planning, you get them to work together through the common cadence and synchronization. But what you really want are pseudo-independent teams, like a team that can pretty much do a full product, not just a feature, not just a story, not just a component. That's what a focused solution team is. Okay, so when you do your PI planning, what you want to do is plan it around MBIs. Again, I know SAFE talks about release when you can and all that, but they plan by features. Well, I can get 80% of my features done and nothing releasable until the end. If I plan around releasable chunks of value, and that's not what a feature is. Now, a lot of people turn it into that. That's fine. But see, now a feature means two things in the same way an MVP means two things. My experience, when something means more than one thing, it means nothing, because then everybody comes up with definitions in between those two things. So the MVP, which by Frank Robinson was a great idea, which we basically call the minimum business increment, or the MVP like Eric Ries, which is a great idea. When an MVP is used here and it's used for a new product you're discovering, well, notice you don't want to throw it into a big train. So you probably don't use it here. So you use the MVP concept in where you're actually doing the equivalent of an MBI or the original MVP. You've destroyed the name. Same what happened with a safe, with the value streams. So if we plan around MBIs, this is a releasable chunk, not just end-to-end functionality that a feature gives us. That's something we want to do. So finally, we can use the dependencies to fix this up and make our improvements based on this. So I'm just going to put up my contact information because I got 3 minutes left. Going to see what I can do from some of these questions. Let's see.
So we've had a number of them on the topic of waterfall, serial, predictive. So here's one from Steve. Is it necessary that some of us repeatedly criticize predictive project methods? Perhaps we should instead take a sacred page from DA and recognize that context counts. What do you think?
Yeah, context definitely counts. And this whole idea of not being able to predict, I'll give you my blunt assessment. It's because it's been latched onto by many in the Agile community who don't know how to make predictions. Now, I'm not saying you could predict everything. Behavior is obviously going to be emergent. Figuring out what the product is going to be emergent. But if you overload teams, if you don't have an understanding of what's going to happen before you start building it, if you have lots of handoffs, you know you're going to be problematic. Like, I don't know exactly how I'm going to drive from, well, I don't commute. I didn't before, but if I had to drive someplace, I don't know exactly what it's going to be like. But I do know this: if I drive in reverse and on the wrong side of the road, I'm going to have problems. And most people tend to actually do that. So we take a different approach. We do believe in complexity, obviously, but we borrow from theory of constraints, inherent simplicity. And I'll give Joshua a link to that if you want to see an alternative to believing there is no predictability. That's absolutely not true. Much more can be predicted that isn't than is being predicted. We're just not studying flow and lean like we should.
Right. So we
Time
do
for another?
have a number of other questions, but as always, we're short on time. So one of the things that Al and I chatted about is we will answer the questions, and instead of doing the typical blog that we're doing, I'd like to direct everybody to a DA community forum that we're going to use, which is allthingsda.com. Al actually has a thought leaders forum specifically for him sharing his thoughts, and I'll get a list of the questions out that we didn't get to, and we can go through and answer some of those in the forum.
Yeah, put some in if you've got others, and I'll try to get to it this afternoon to get some to you right away. That'd be great. I'll give you some references there as well. It'd be a great way to kick that off.
Awesome. And I'm going to just pull up our coming schedule. So one thing I'll mention is, from a sponsor perspective, yes, please visit us at processmentors.com. One of the things that we are doing more and more is we are providing some opportunities for consultation. So if you have additional questions or looking to adopt DA in your organization, we have some free consultations. We are doing some of the new workshops. So Glenn Little and I are delivering the new Discipline Agile Scrum Master workshop next week. And we still have some DA LSM workshops that we have on the calendar, and we'll be doing the new DA SSM Senior Scrum Master workshops as soon as those are out. And then next week, we will have Al, Mark, and Scott all on an Ask Me Anything webinar. And I'm not sure if that's the first time all three of you will be on that type of a forum, but it'll be fantastic to have the three thought leaders from DA join us to be able to answer your questions. Al, as always, really appreciate it. Always learn something from you. And thank you, everybody, for attending today, both either live in person or anybody that watches this on replay. Al, any closing thoughts?
Nope. Happy to be here. Happy to get questions asked of me, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks for having me, and thanks for attending.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And we're excited to see you next week.